Masechet Menaḥot, Daf Non Vav. We are analyzing this pasuk that speaks about the korban hatat that a king brings. He brings a sa'ir. Ve'samach yado al rosh ha'sa'ir ve'shachat oto bimkom asher yishchat et ha'olah. That he will place his hands upon that sa'ir, that's the ruler, the nasi, the king, and he will slaughter it in the place where the olah is slaughtered, which means in the north. And the question is, what is this word oto coming to exclude? Sounds like this specifically is slaughtered in the north, but there's something else that's not slaughtered there. So that's our question. What is this coming to exclude? So we ask, oto lemeute mai? Lumeute oto basafon ve'en sa'ir nachshon basafon. We're going to suggest four answers that are indicated by this mnemonic: nachshon, v'shahat, off, and pesach. So here's the first one, nachshon, and it's teaching us that yes, this sa'ir of the nasi is slaughtered in the north, but not the sa'ir of nachshon. That's referring to Nachshon ben Aminadav, the nasi from the tribe of Yehuda. Here he was bringing, in fact, it was a sa'ir azim, and it was a chatat, although this was not a regular chatat, not because he did a sin, rather this was for the inauguration of the Mishkan. In fact, it was not only Nachshon, but all of the Nisi'im, one from each tribe, brought it. We're bringing Nachshon just as an example, but the same thing would apply to any of the Se'irim that were brought by the Nisi'im on the day of the consecration of the Mishkan, that you might think that they would have to be slaughtered in the north, and that's why this word Otah is coming to teach you that no, only this of a king. They say there is a similarity. This talks about the Nasi in this pasuk, and these are also about Nasi'im. So when you come to a Nasi, this one, his regular korban hatat that he brings for all generations, has to be in the north, but not the sa'ir of Nachshon. Now, why would you think that Nachshon would have to bring it in the north? I would think so, because since it is the one of Nachshon is included regarding semicha, he has to do semicha. I would think, well, he has to do semicha, so it makes sense. It also has to be slaughtered in the north, and that's why I need this pasuk oto to tell me not so. Uchsmicha gufa minala. Now, where do we see that it's included in the law of semicha? Detanya v'samach yado al rosh hasa'ir lerabot sa'ir nachshon lismicha divrei Rabbi Yehuda, because the pasuk says that he will place his hands on the head of the sa'ir. That's the same pasuk here, 424. That talks about the nasi, and we say that this comes to include. It could have said v'samach yado al rosho. Why do I have to say al rosh hasa'ir? So that extra word comes to say hasa'ir. Oh yes, another sa'ir, the one of Nachshon, has to be included, and you have to do semicha for it according to the Biyudah. So all this makes sense according to the Biyudah. Once you're learning semicha from the sa'ir of the nasi to Nachshon, so I might think also that one has to slaughter it in the north as well. And that's why the word oto says, no, oto is only for the nasi of the regular chatat and nasi, and not Nachshon. So the Biyudah we understand. Rabbi Shimon omer lerabot sa'irei avodah zara lismicha. However, Rabbi Shimon says that the word hasa'ir is coming to include the sa'ir that one has to bring for a communal sin of avodah zara, and it's teaching me that here this word al rosh hasa'ir instead of just rosho hasa'ir comes to tell me that if the community issues a wrong ruling regarding avodah zarah, then the judges have to do semicha. That's what it's coming to include. Now, if that's true, then you wouldn't think that Nachshon is included in semicha. So then you wouldn't think that he would have to do shechita in the north, and you wouldn't need oto to exclude it. So you see that according to the Rabbi Shimon, we would still have a question. So that's our next point. Matkif la Ravina tenach la Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ma'ika lememar. Fine, we have a logical flow according to the Rabbi Yehuda, because he thinks that sa'ir has sa'ir is coming to include Nachshon and semicha. Therefore, you might think that he is also included in shechita in the north. Therefore, Oto comes to say not so. But according to the Rabbi Shimon, Nasir is coming for something completely different. So I would never even think that Nachshon would have to do semicha, to think that he would have to do shechita in the north. So I don't need Oto to exclude it. Amar lemor zutra bered Rav Mari l'Ravina l'Rabbi Yehuda name mai de itrabe mai de la itrabe. Mo Zutra, the son of Rav Mari, tells Ravina it's even a problem according to the Yehuda, because according to him also, that which the pasuk includes will include, meaning pasuk talks about semicha, so we'll say, the king requires semicha, so too Nachshon will require semicha. That I understand. But that which is not included, why would we assume that we would include that? The pasuk does not say anything about slaughtering in the north. Just because it says you have to do semicha for Nachshon also, I mean, that's what we learned from it. Why would that mean that, if you have to do semicha, then also you have to slaughter in the north? What's the connection between the two? The pasuk doesn't say anything about slaughtering it in the north for Nachshon, that then you would have to come to exclude it. So there's no reason in the first place to even think that Nachshon would have to slaughter his Sa'ir l'chatat in the north, and therefore we don't need the pasuk and the word oto to exclude it. So therefore, this theory is rejected. And if you say that if I did not have the word oto to exclude Nachshon from slaughtering in the north, then I would have thought to include it based on binyan av, from the korban chatat of a king. Let that be a paradigm, since that has to be done in the north. Then everything else has to be all other korbanot are of that type would have to be done in the north, and that would include Nachshon. So maybe I would have included in the binyan av, but that can't be, because semicha gufa lishtokera mineh v'tete b'binyan av. Because if so, I would not need a derivation regarding semicha. So let the pasuk be quiet about semicha. I wouldn't need that to learn it from the extra word v'hasa'ir instead of just rosho, and I could learn based on the binyan av that just like here, this type of korban of a nasi you have to do semicha. So to everything else that's similar to it would also have to have semicha, and I wouldn't need this extra word. But the pasuk does have an extra word, so that shows that you do not learn semicha from binyan av. If so, you also do not learn the slaughtering in the north from the binyan av. Ela sha'a midorot layalfinan hachana me sha'a midorot layalfinan. Why don't we learn semicha from binyan av? Because we're not going to learn a law from a law. We're not going to learn a law that happened only once from a law that is applicable in all generations. The law of the nasi applies in all generations, a king, whereas Nachshon was only a one-time event. And so there are two different categories. And so just that's the reason why we do not apply binyan av when it comes to semicha. And so too, we would say the same thing, that we would not apply binyan av regarding slaughtering in the north. And therefore, there is no reason to ever think that korban Nachshon would have to be in the north in the first place, and therefore the word oto is not needed to tell us that korban Nachshon does not have to be in the north. Okay, so we reject that line of thinking completely. Ela oto ta'un safon ven hashochet amod basafon. Rather, the word oto comes to teach me, the shchat oto is referring to the animal, and says, yes, oto, the animal has to be in the north when you slaughter it, but the shochet does not have to be in the north. If the shochet is standing in the south and he's holding a long knife, and the knife extends into the northern half of the temple courtyard, and he does shechita while standing in the south, then that's okay. So that's what it's coming to teach, that the animal has to be in the north, but the shochet could be in the south. So is that what's coming to teach? And we respond, no, because midirabi achiyah nafka. We know that law already from a different derivation taught by Rabbi Achiyah. The Tanya Rabbi Achiyah Omer, v'shachat oto al yerech hamizbeach safona, ma tamud lomar. There's a pasuk regarding a korban olah that says he slaughters it on the side of the mizbeach to the north. Now, what does this pasuk come to teach? Lefisha masinu b'mekabel shomed basafon umkabel basafon v'mad b'darom v'kibel basafon pasul yachol af ze ken. Because we know regarding the receiving of the blood, if that the person who receives the blood has to be standing in the north, and he has to receive it in the north. Both the animal and the person, the kohen, receiving the blood have to both be in the north. And if the person was standing in the south and leaning over and receiving the blood Well, the animal is in the north and it's no good. So since I know that law, I might think that that's also true for shechita, that the shochet has to be in the north. Talmud omar oto basafon v'lo hashochet tzarich liot omed basafon. Therefore, the pasuk regarding the korban olah says v'shachat oto, meaning the animal has to be in the north, but the shochet does not have to be in the north. So we see that we already know this law, and we learn it. It's applied to korban olah, but we'll learn it for all other Kodesh Kodashim that have to be done in the north. And therefore, we do not need the pasuk regarding the Se'ir Hatat of the Nasi, the word Oto there. We don't need it to teach us that. Ela Oto Basafon. Okay, so we reject that. That was the second answer. But remember, because we're going to come back to this one at the end. But now we have the third proposal. Oto Basafon ve'en ben off Basafon. The word Oto comes to teach me that an animal has to be slaughtered of this type, a Kodesh Kodashim has to be slaughtered in the north, but a bird that is brought as a korban does not have to be slaughtered in the north. Even if it's a korban hatat, this bird, which is a Kodesh Kodashim, does not have to be slaughtered in the north. Rather you do melikah, but you could do the melikah just near the mizbeach. Doesn't have to be in the north. Now, why would you think it would have to be in the north? Because I might think to bring a kal vachomer from a sheep, ma ben son, shelo kaba lo kohen, kaba lo safon. Ben of shekaba lo kohen and odin shenikba lo safon. We'll learn it from a kal vachomer. If a sheep where it does not have to have the shechita does not have to be done by a kohen, anybody can do shechita of a sheep, so it's more lenient. And yet the sheep for Kodesh Kodashim has to be done in the north, then a bird where it's more stringent in that a kohen has to do melikah. Can't be anybody else. All the more so, you would think that a bird has to be done in the north. And that's why I need oto to say, not so, a bird can be done anywhere. Ma leben son sheken kabat lo kili, but we would reject that kal vachomer because a sheep has a stringency itself, in that you need a utensil. So maybe you need a knife, whereas a bird, doesn't need any utensil. He just uses his thumb. So maybe the reason that the sheep is in the north is because it has also the stringency of requiring a utensil. But a bird that does not require utensil does not have to be in the north. So you see, that breaks the kal vachomer. Ela Oto basafon ven pesach basafon. So we reject that third answer, and now we get to the fourth answer, that the sa'ir of the nasi has to be slaughtered in the north, and korban pesach does not have to be slaughtered in the north. Now pesach, we say, midrabi Eliezer ben Yaakov nafka. No, we already know pesach does not have to be in the north, from a derivation of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Tanya Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Amid Yachol Yeh Pesach Ta'on Safon, Vedinhu, Ma Ola Shelo Kaba La Zeman B'Shchita V'Kaba La Safon, Pesach Shekaba Lo Zeman L'Shchitato Enodin Shekaba Lo Safon. Can it be that you might think that Korban Pesach has to be in the north, and you might learn that from a kal vachomer. If a Korban Olah where has no fixed time, you could bring Korban Olah anytime that you want, and yet has to be that has to be in the north. Pesach, which is more stringent in that has a fixed time, only on the 14th day of Nisan in the afternoon. So all the more so that it's more stringent, all the more so it has to be done in the north. But we would reject that kal vachomer. Olah sheken kalil, but olah gets entirely burnt, so that's more stringent. Then maybe that's why it has to be done in the north, and Pesach is not all burnt. Okay, fine. Mechatat, we could learn it from chatat, which is not all burnt, and that has to be done in the north. So too, we should say Pesach also. No, but chatat has a stringency in that it atones for things that you would be liable to karet if you had done it on purpose. But that does not apply to Korban Pesach, so we would not learn it from Chatat. Fine, Me'asham, let's learn from Asham. That has to be done in the north, so to Korban Pesach, but we reject that too. Ma'ale Asham sheken Kodesh Kodashim. But Asham is Kodesh Kodashim, Pesach is Kodashim Kalim. Okay, Mikuluhu Name sheken Kodesh Kodashim. Even if you put all these together, Olah, Chatat, Asham, all of these are Kodesh Kodashim. So that's why they have to be done in the north, and Korban Pesach does not have to be done in the north. So you see that we learn from this Braita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that Korban Pesach, there's no reason to ever think that it would have to be done in the north. And therefore, we do not need the word oto to teach me that. Rather, we're going to go back to our second answer. Oto basafon ve'en hashochet basafon. the korban nasi, the sir chatat of a nasi, has to be done in the north, but the slaughterer, the animal has to be in the north rather, but the shochet does not have to be in the north, the shochet can be in the south. And that which you asked, we can learn it from Rabbi Achia. Rabbi Achia lav the me'ut shochet basafon hu da'ata, el hachi ka'amar, en ha-shochet basafon, aval mikabel basafon. No, you misunderstood Rabbi Achia's point. He was not teaching me that to exclude the shochet, that the shochet does not have to be in the safon. That's what we thought he was teaching. Rather, he was saying that, assuming that the shochet does not have to be in the safon, right? That he's assuming that we know already, but he didn't bring a source for that. Rather, he's teaching me that unlike the shochet, who can be in the south, the mekabel, the receiver of the blood, has to be in the north. That was his point. But he didn't actually bring a source that the shochet has to be in the south, and therefore this is the source. So mekabel. Now we question that. Is that true? Mekabel me lakach velakach nafka. No, but we can derive that the receiver has to be. It has to be in the north from the extra vav. That instead of just lakach, it says velakach. This is a few pesukim later than this. 34, lakach velakach hakol midam achatat bespa'o. So from the vav, we learned that the kohen also has to be in the north. So we already know it. So then we wouldn't need to be chiyat to learn that. And the answer to that is lakach velakach la mashma le. Rabbi Chia does not learn the vav. He does not learn anything from the extra vav. Since he does not learn anything from the extra vav, his derivation was teaching me that the mekabel has to be in the north. But his derivation had nothing to do with the law of the shochet. Where does the shochet have to be? He was assuming that the shochet has to be in the south, but can be in the south, but he did not derive it. And therefore, the final answer is that the word oto regarding the korban that the nasi, the king, brings for a korban hatat, when it says oto there, it's coming to tell me that the animal has to be in the north, but the shochet can be in the south. Back to the Mishnah that says that if a korban mincha becomes chametz, or most of them, which are not allowed to become chametz, then one is liable for allowing it to become chametz, and one is further liable for every action that one does with it, for kneading it, for shaping it, and for baking it. Amar Papa, afa'a lokesh shetayim, achat al arichata ve'achat al afiyata. Rav Papa says that if one bakes it, just that act of baking it prompts two sets of lashes, one for forming it and one for baking it. In other words, when you bake it, that also forms it. By baking it, it also takes its shape. So baking itself prompts two liabilities. We ask, wait a second, we said in a baraita earlier that we're quoting it, just as baking is notable, and that's it's a single action, and one is liable for it by itself. That means for baking alone, one is liable only one. But Papa said baking itself prompts two of them because it's also forming. Well, so these contradict each other. Papa can't go against the braita. La kashya hadarichu ve'afahu hadarich chabre ve'ahible ve'afa. And the answer is there's no problem. The braita is talking about a case where he actually formed it. Like, he made a challah, he made it round, he braided it, whatever he did. He actually formed it, so he's liable for forming it for the actual formation. And then when he bakes it, although the baking further forms it and finishes the form, but he's not going to be liable again for forming it. When he bakes it, he'll be liable just for baking it because he already was liable when he put it into shapes. He was liable to forming. So that's what the baraita means, that if he had already formed it, then for baking it, he'll be liable just one because he already formed it, and then another one just for baking. Whereas Rav Papa was talking about a case where someone else formed it. Someone else made it into circles or whatever shape, and then gave it to this person, and this person just baked it. But because he baked it, he is still liable to two, because baking is the end of the process of forming. It also is liable for baking. And so that's what Rav Papa was talking about. Tenora banan, bechol shahazor dam, mekizin oto et hadam b'makom she'en osim bo mum, ve'en makizin et hadam b'makom she'osim bo mum, divrei Rabbi Meir. Now, we're going to talk about a totally different case, but it's going to connect back in the discussion below to the cases above. And this Baraita is talking about a Bechor animal, which is holy, and the owner has to give it to the Kohen. As long as it's unblemished, the Kohen will have to bring it as a sacrifice, sacrifices part, and eats the rest. If it gets a blemish, then the Bechor can keep it for himself and just do shechita and eat it like regular meat. So there's actually a benefit to the Kohen if it gets a blemish, but you're not allowed to put a blemish on purpose. Now, the Braita teaches that a Bechor that's sick, and in order to make it better, you have to do bloodletting. Bloodletting was done to human beings, and it was also done to animals. So its blood is constricted, and you have to let out some blood in order for it to live. So can you do that? The problem is that when you, by bloodletting, you have to make a cut. Here's someone doing some bloodletting. You have to cut the vein. You have to cut somewhere on the body, and then that's causing a blemish. But you can't make a blemish on a Bechor. So how are you going to do that? I'm going to see 4 opinions. This first opinion of Rabbi Meir says, we make a blemish in a place that will not be a permanent blemish, and we do not make a blemish in a place that will be a permanent blemish. So just you don't do it on his ear or eye or something like that, but rather somewhere in the flesh where you make a hole, but then it'll get better, and then that's okay. Hachamim say you can make the incision even in a place that will make it a blemish, as long as you should do shechita based on that blemish. So therefore, you're saving its life. So it's okay to make the blemish, but we're afraid that if once we let him, then he's going to, even if maybe it doesn't need bloodletting, maybe you could make it better in some other way. He's going to go and bloodlet it so that he can make a blemish, so that he doesn't have to sacrifice it. So in order to make sure that happens, we say, listen, you can make a blemish because obviously you think you need to, but you cannot do shechita on it based on that blemish. You'll have to wait until it gets a second blemish, and only then you can do a shechita based on that second blemish. That way, he won't come to and give it a blemish, and if it's not necessary. Rabbi Shimon Omer, af nishchat al oto mum. Rabbi Shimon says that no, since it's sick and that itself is a blemish, it's going to die. So you can make a blemish in order to save its life. So it's already blemished by being so sick, and you can even do shechita. You don't have to wait. We don't have to worry that the person's then going to do this on purpose when it's not really needed. It's allowed. It's allowed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu met en makizin lo et adam. Rabbi Yehuda goes to the opposite extreme of stringency and says, even if it will die because you're not letting the blood, you cannot let blood at all. You just simply cannot make a blemish in an animal at all. That's a bechor, and just leave it even if it dies. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hakol modim bim hametz achar mechametz shehu chayav, tichtib lo te'aseh hametz ve'lo te'afeh hametz. Now Rabbi Chia bar Abba says in Rabbi Yochanan that everybody agrees. So even though the sages above disagree whether you can make a blemish on something that already is blemished, because basically by being so sick, that's already a blemish. Rabbi Yehuda says, nevertheless, you cannot give it another blemish. The other sages, you can give it another blemish to some degree. What kind of blemish, where, and how they disagree with. So over here, there is a disagreement among those Tanaim above about the Bechor, whether you can add a blemish to another blemish. However, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, even though they disagree in that case, they all agree regarding mechametz achar mechametz. If something is already, if you have a mincha offering that is chametz, and then you make it further chametz, you are liable. Dichtib lo te'aseh chametz ve'lo te'afeh chametz, because there's 2 pesukim saying don't make it leaven, don't bake it with leaven. That means every action that you do, that while it's chametz, you made it chametz, you knead it with chametz, you bake it with chametz. Everything that you do as chametz, one is liable again and again. Everybody agrees in that case because of this pasuk. Bimsares achar mesares hu chayav dichtib uma'uch vechatut venatuk vecharut. Im al koret hu chayav al notek lo kol sheken ela lehavi notek achar koret shehu chayav. And similarly, if someone castrates an animal and then further castrates it, causes damage to it even more than it was before, then still one is liable. As the pasuk says, animals whose testicles are bruised, crushed, detached, cut, shall not be offered, and you're not allowed to do it. Not only is it not a good sacrifice, one is not allowed to even do it to an animal. So we wonder if one is liable if its veins and testicles are cut, then all the more so if they're detached altogether. So why do you have to even say that? Oh, so why does it have all these verbs? To teach me that one is liable even after one detaches it. Could be you detach it, but it's still in the sack. It's not completely removed. And then one cuts it further, then one is liable. So one is liable for misares achar mesares. So even though they have a disagreement regarding the case of making it a mum and giving it a further mum, is that allowed or not allowed? But they all agree that you cannot make it do further things even after it's chametz, and they all agree that you cannot further destroy its testicles even after it already has some damage. Lo nechliku ela b'matil mum b'ba'al mum. But rather, the argument is not in those two cases, but they do argue if you're putting a blemish after a blemish. Rabbi Meir sabar kol mum lo yeh bo. Rabbi Meir says, since it says in the pasuk, there shall be no blemish, so the word kol comes to mean any blemish, even a second blemish on the animal that already was blemished, still that's prohibited. V'Rabbanan sabre tamim yeh l'rason. That same pasuk says tamim, it has to be perfect, unblemished. That means if it's unblemished, you're not allowed to make a blemish. But once it has a blemish already, then what's the difference if you make a secondary blemish? But Rabbi Meir, what is he going to do with the pasuk that says it has to be perfect? Doesn't that mean that once it has a blemish, so then it's already not tamim? So what are you going to learn from this pasuk? Oh, that's coming to exclude from the prohibition of making a blemish to an animal that had a blemish, that it was born with a blemish. If it was born with a blemish, the Rabbi Meir agrees that then you can make a blemish. He only said over here, if it was born unblemished, and then it got a blemish later on, you're not allowed to make it further blemish, because it once upon a time was good. But if it was born with a blemish, then this pasuk tamim tiyeh says, if born with a blemish, then you can make another blemish. We ask about that. Ba'amu meikara dikla ba'almahu. If it was born from the outset with a blemish, then that's like a palm tree. I mean, it's not even it never became a consecrated animal. So it's just like making a hole in a palm tree. It has no consecration. So obviously you can make a blemish in it. You wouldn't need a pasuk to teach me that. Ela lemeute pesudah mukdashim lachar pidjonam sakada tachamina ho'il va'asire begiza va'avoda b'mumam nami seri kamashmalan. Okay, fine. This pasuk, according to the Rabbi Meir, tamim yeh l'rason, is coming to exclude from the prohibition an animal that you sanctified. And let's say you sanctified it as a korban, and then it got a pasul, like it got a blemish. And then you redeem it. You redeem its once it gets a blemish, you redeem its monetary value, and you take that money and you buy a new unblemished animal. I might think that one would not be permitted to make a blemish in that animal. Well, why not? It already has a blemish, and you already redeemed it. Well, you might think that's still prohibited because it still retains some amount of holiness. You have to treat it with some respect. In that, you're not allowed to shear it, and you're not allowed to use it for labor, because once upon a time it was consecrated. So I might think still, since it retains those prohibitions, maybe you're also not allowed to put any further blemish on it. That's why the pasuk says, according to the Rabbi Meir, tamim yeh l'rason, that this type of korban that already got a blemish, already was excluded and was redeemed, although you can't work it and shear it, you are allowed to put a further blemish on it. V'Rabbanan nami haketib kol mum lo yeh bo. Now the rabbis, what are they going to do with the pasuk that says kol mum? They said once any animal, a bechor, has a blemish, you can put another blemish on it. So what is he going to do with the word kol mum lo yebo? Haumi ba'ele lichetanya v'chol mum lo yebo en li ela shelo yebo mum minayin shelo yigrom lo al yede acherim shelo yaniach basek od belal gabe haozen kedei sheyavo haked levitelenu Talmud omar kol mum amar mum ve'amar kol mum. So the rabbis say, we need the word kol mum to teach me the lesson of the following Baraita. When the pasuk says kol mum lo yebo, so I only know that you can't have a blemish in it. How do you know that you can't do it directly? I can't go and take a knife and make a blemish, so that's for sure. But how do you know that? What if I do it indirectly? I cause indirectly some other way that the animal will get a blemish. For example, if I put some dough or dried figs on the ear of the animal, and then since there's this figs on it, a dog will come and bite it off. And this is a pretty horrible thing to do. But you say, well, I'm not doing it. I just put some delicious stuff on its ear, and the dog comes and bites off the ear, and then causes the animal to be blemished. You might think that that's allowed because I'm not putting a blemish directly. I just put some dough on it. So that's also not allowed. How do you know? Because it says kol mum. It could have said mum. So mum, find that I know the basic law, they can't put a mum. But kol mum teaches that I'm not allowed to even cause indirectly a mum to come to the animal. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.